All right, when we left you last time, we basically had the gun, the marker in this position. These might be off. You might also have taken the feed neck off. This is Loctited down, so I don't take this off. You know, you can clean that without it. On a Series 6, you never need to take these off. You know, Series 6.5, where that's at Spider, you can take them off a lot easier. I don't worry about it personally. So this is basically the position you've got. A Series 5, Series 6, or Series 5 Basic basically looks like this, okay? So the first thing we want to do is to take the IVG out, internal velocity governor, and that takes a 1/8 inch Allen. Pay attention though, if you've had this marker set up properly before, you don't want to put it back to its settings when you put it back together. This gun runs almost flush, it's about a turn in with the back, and it runs at 300 psi in the regulator. So I'm going to make sure I reset my reg at 300 psi, and I'm going to count how many turns it was to get this thing out so I can put it back right. That's 2 turns, 3 turns, 4 turns, about 4.5, well, 5.5 turns. Take the spring out, I'll start setting these up in line, okay? That's the IVG, that's the main spring, okay? Those can wear over time, you can replace those. And again, what I'm doing right now is taking the hammer out. In the bottom of the hammer is this lug. That lug controls the depth and how the trigger fires. If you drop the lug lower, the trigger will fire later. If you raise the lug up, the sear will be easier to drop below that, and it will fire earlier. So anyway, I want that set about right to how I left it, so I'm going to count this again. I usually do 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and that should allow the hammer to dump right out. If you don't turn it out 4, this lug will grab that hole and it won't let the hammer out. Look how polished this hammer is. I polish the hammer every few times that I play, especially if it gets dirty, to make sure that this stays as smooth as possible. CCM prides itself on its high tolerances, so I want to make sure that I'm polishing and giving it the best chance that it can be to be the racehorse it was meant to be. Now, you've got 2 screws left down here. This screw comes out first, and it comes out with a 5/64. Lied to you again. It comes out with a 3/32. There we go. 3/32. What it does is it retains the nut that retains the valve. So once I've got that screw out, I can take the valve retention nut out, and I'm going to need a sniper valve tool or cocker valve tool. You can get this from CCM. I'll link that at the bottom right now. It slides in the back like this, goes over the pin. That's why there's that hole in the end of there. That's why you need a tool, not just an Allen key. It goes over that, slight turn, and that comes out. Everyone, if I've ever seen is red, that's what it looks like. Now you need a 5/32 to take off the valve retention grub screw. It comes out, gets set right there. And what comes out next is the valve body, the valve pin assembly, and the hammer, and the spring. And that goes in looking like that. So that's basically your valve recreated on the table there in front of you. Can you see that? Yes, you can. So you're good there. You might not pull out a blue valve. You might pull out one of the new CCM brass valves. It's not a big deal. They look basically the same. They're just brass instead of aluminum. A little bit more self-lubricating is the theory. I think they're great, but I run what works and what came with the gun. There's no reason to replace and fix what isn't broken. Now, one thing you should pay attention to on the pins that come out of here, these are modular, okay? There's a set screw in here. Once you take that out, you can take apart this piece from this piece and replace that O-ring. If you get a leak in your valve, and it's leaking down your barrel, either your pressure's too low, and you should check that, or this O-ring has given up the ghost, okay? Make sure it stays clean. Do not assemble it with any lubrication. There's no reason to, okay? I also polish this. I want this to be as smooth as possible in this valve body. And so that's what I do. All right? Call me a freak. When reassembling, I want to put a little bit of marmalade, and you can see there's still some on there, on that valve body to make sure it seats, and I'm going to put it back together. I'm then going to run, and I'm not going to do this actually because sometimes it can be a little bit more hassle than it's worth. I'm going to run a squeegee, and if it's really dirty, I'm going to run, clean out this bottom tube as best I can. Double check that these screw holes haven't grabbed any of the fuzz off of your squeegee. Clean all that out, dry, let it dry, and then you're ready for reassembly. Now you know that that bottom tube is running as well as it possibly can. And it looks like mine's pretty clean, so I'm not going to worry about it. Now, trick when reassembling is to stack this up in this order. Grab your cocker valve tool. So you've got the spring, the valve, the body, and the nut all on the end of that. Then you're going to take the body, and I usually do it like this, but to show you guys, put it in like this and start to thread that down. Now what you're going to need to pay attention to is once you get about tight, make sure that you have the valve the right way. There's a hole and there's a detent or a dent in there. And they'll turn as you go around. That's wrong. That's the hole. You put the screw in there, you got no air coming out of that valve. Okay? This, one more turn, and maybe I'll have to give it a little finesse. There we go. That's the way what you want to see. Take your valve retention valve retention grub screw with a 5/32 Allen key, even though I tried a 1/8, and tighten that just about finger tight. That's setting the valve in the right position to make the maximal amount of air be able to be passed through this marker and out your bolt. Then give this another little snug to tighten that down. Now it's pretty much tight. Once that's snugged down, grab your 5/32 again, snug that down fully, and then put your valve retention grub screw, there's a name, back in. And that takes a 3/32 to put that back in. You don't want to over tighten this. This just needs to be barely finger tight. What you don't want to do is crush the threads on that nut. So barely finger tight, that's back together. Everything's good to go. Now the hammer gets dropped in. When you're dropping the hammer in, keep the Allen key side up, because that's when you're going to need to adjust, and the lug side down. Try to match that up. It should look something like that when you put it back together. So what you want to then do, turn it back over carefully, insert the 1/8 inch Allen key, which goes right through the body and into the lug, and give it 4 turns, because that's what we took off. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that should get it really close to set that it was before. The other thing you can do to measure that, to check that out, is to see the wear line on the side. I'm not sure how well you can see that. The wear line on the side of this channel here, and set it about at the wear line. And you can see, if you can see that, it's set right at the wear line. So I know that it's about set right. Okay? Then what goes in next is the hammer spring. That just gets set in there. And the IVG goes in. And I know that mine was about flush. I could have counted 5 turns back in because that's what I took it apart at. But I know it was about flush with about a turn in. So that's going to be just about right when I reassemble the marker. But that's it for the bottom tube. The things you're going to watch for there are the 2 O-rings that are in there. The main one is that moving O-ring on the valve. Replace that as necessary. And the one on the body. If you get a small leak out the back of the gun here, it's going to be the valve body. Rarely happens. What you're going to most often get is a leak out the barrel. If it's leaking out the barrel and you know your pressure is good in the gun or it's not oversprung in here, check that valve, make sure that that O-ring is good, replace as needed. Okay? All right, we'll reassemble this bad boy, and I'll show you how to time it from here on out. Okay, if you've been following the videos and you've run them through one step at a time, also jumped over to the regulator video that I'll link right now, how to take apart and reassemble the regulator, you should have a marker that's back together. And the only thing that needs to be done is it needs to be timed, and then the feet per second needs to be set. You should be running your regulator, whatever you ran it with before. They come from the factory at 350. I run them around 300. I think this one actually is running around 325. Whatever works best for you. Okay. But what we need to do now is to set the timing. So let's check the timing. And again, I did 4 turns in on that lug to see if I get it pretty close. And what we're looking for here, as we're holding down the trigger with our thumb, is for this back block to fire, be in the firing position when it's at about 1/8 inch, or right about there, the width of that Allen key. Right about there, that's when we want it to fire. When you're pumping the marker so quickly in auto trigger, by the time that fires and the air comes out, you've already got that 1 inch closed. So that's proper timing. So let's see how I did. Wow, money the first time. But let's pretend that I didn't. If I was firing too early, firing somewhere around here, what I'd want to do is to drop my screw in here. To usually pull this cocking rod back until it seats, and I don't want to drop that lug righty-tighty. I don't want to drop that lug to get it to fire later in the firing sequence. If it was firing late, or frankly not firing at all, I'd want to again drop this in, pull this back a little, finesse it in, and I'd want to loosen it up, lefty-loosey, just a little bit to loosen that up. I happen to get it right the first time, and that's why it pays to pay just a little bit of attention when you're taking it apart. And that's firing just about right, man. Maybe it's a little loose. Maybe I'll tighten that up just a little bit, just for fun. And it doesn't take much, man. That little bit of 1/8 of a turn, that's money. That set it perfectly. Okay, so we've got that set right. Now what we need to set is the velocity. But here's the deal. If you're coming from semi-auto guns in particular, you're used to setting your velocity through your regulator. Don't do it. Don't do it on a pump gun. Once you set it to 300, 350, whatever you're comfortable with on your marker, what you know works well, set it and forget it. Leave it there, okay? Set it and walk away. Where you're going to adjust the velocity from here on out is in the internal velocity governor that's in the back of the marker. Okay. Now the old way of doing this on cockers, which is that you had to take the cocking rod out and use a 3/16 tool through the back. That's why this beaver tail is open. But you don't on a CCM. You can use a 1/8 inch tool, grab the thing that fits, tighten it up to turn up the velocity, loosen it up to reduce the velocity, and that's where you're going to want to make sure, that's how you're going to see if the marker is shooting properly. Now, when you first air this up, what you need to do is cock it first, then turn the tank on, okay? That will not allow the hammer to force the valve open and you'll be leaking down your barrel. Always pump the gun first on any Chipley sniper pump marker before you air it up, or you're going to be leaking down your barrel and looking like a tool. You don't need any help doing that because you're probably going to do that on the paintball field. So do that, and then the marker should fire. Should seal just like it did, and should fire. Again, we're going to adjust the timing out the top, and we're going to adjust the velocity out the back. Leave the reg alone. There are times in some Series 6s where what can happen is that you adjust this IVG in enough that all of a sudden you start a down the barrel leak, or it starts to get chuffy, chuff, chuff, on every shot. You might want to then increase the pressure to close that valve a little bit. It's a little bit of a balancing act on the Series 6 and the J2L. Not really on the Series 5, don't ask me why, but you sometimes might need to balance that a little bit. So those are little tweaks. What you don't want to be doing is, I can't get up to pressure, and turning that regulator up. For those of you that are new to this platform, there's one major other problem with turning this regulator up too far. What will happen is you'll increase the pressure so much that it shuts the valve faster, and actually instead of turning it up, you're turning it down. There's a sweet spot in there where it's enough pressure coming through, but not too much that it closes the valve. So again, between 300 and 350 PSI, whatever you know sets right, and if you want to start at a good default point, Rod sets them at 350 from the factory. Start there and adjust everything else out from the IVG. Okay, but that's it for the J2L Series 6 and Series 5 markers. That should get you apart and back together for the most part, and get you back on the field. Thanks a lot for watching.